Okay, so I will start by explaining to why we have done this research. So I did this research in 2018 with my colleague Matthew Gardner. We did this as part of our MSCs at UEA. We both had a dream of studying endemic birds on islands, and we had to come up with a project. Spoke to our supervisors, and they gave us a list of birds in the Caribbean that were either critically endangered or their status was not known. And we came up with Grand Bahama because it had two birds that were found in the same habitat. And so, for transport reasons, logistical reasons, safety reasons, we decided to go for Grand Bahama because it had the two birds that needed researching and were found in the same habitat. And that's how we came to be. Um, okay, so location of Grand Bahama, quite close to Florida. This is where we did our research. Another important island is Abaco, very important for the warbler. Andros is the biggest island in the archipelago. The archipelago itself has 700 islands, 2,400 keys, but Andros is the biggest of them all. It has a very important bird, Bahama Oriole, which is endemic to this island, only lives here. Nassau is the capital, uh, and Bahamas has a population of just short of 400,000 people, but Grand Bahama 50,000. Because it is so close to America, it does get many wintering birds from October to April. An example is the Kirtland's warbler. This bird almost went extinct in the 1970s. There were only 200 birds left. Uh, but in 1971, because of conservation efforts from the US, because it was considered endangered, there were conservation efforts from US organizations, Bahamas NGOs, and when we arrived on the island, there were more than, well, an estimated 2,000 or 2,300 birds left, and the population continues increasing because of this success story. Um, not really, not really sure why it was decreasing, other than there were elements of habitat fragmentation, and there was also in the conservation efforts parasite control and predator control. Parasites were shiny cowbirds, and it suffered predation from cats. Uh, so Grand Bahama itself, or the Bahamas, has only one documented extinction, 1877, the Brace's emerald. It's endemic to, it was endemic to New Providence Island, but the last individual was shot by a bird collector. Um, Other extinctions to note, these are more local extinctions. The West Indies woodpecker used to live on Grand Bahama, but it was declared extinct in the 1990s. But no one knows why. It could be many things: habitat fragmentation, severity and frequency of fires. No one really knows why. Bahama Oriole, as I've mentioned, now lives only on Andros. It used to live in Abaco. It also went extinct. Not really sure why. And Bahama Swallow does live um, in Grand Bahama, I believe, in Abaco, Cuba even. Sometimes it wanders to Cuba, although it's rarely seen there. But it went extinct in New Providence Island in the Bahamas in the 1980s. So these are your six endemics. Bahama wood star, which is now called Bahama Hummingbird. It's a species of least concern. It breeds in US. It is also fairly abundant in several islands of the Bahamas. We didn't see, well, we only saw, I think, about two or three individuals, and not that many when we did our surveys in pine forest. Bahama Oriole, As I said, it now is restricted to Andros only and only to the northern part of Andros. So much research is needed there. Um, this Bahama woodstar, which has three subspecies in other islands of the Bahamas, quite a pretty bird. I took this shot. I was very lucky, but it is, yeah, such a pretty bird. But otherwise, least concern, fairly abundant. We found many of them. I don't quite know the number, but we found many. Bahama Warbler was the species I studied. Then we have Bahama Swallow. When we went to the island, it was considered endangered. There was about 1,000 or 2,500 birds estimated left. It is restricted to Andros and Grand Bahama, but yeah, as I said, can also be seen. It has been seen in Cuba, so it's not entirely endemic to Bahamas. It does wander outside. And finally, Bahama Nuthatch, which is well, it was critically endangered when we started, um, but I'll tell you more about it. So we went to the Bahamas because, first of all, the Bahama Nuthatch had not been seen since 2016. 2016, there was Hurricane Matthew of Category 4. It hit Grand Bahama, and the bird disappeared. Its population was already severely declined. And then we also needed to, and I should say that Bahama Nuthatch didn't get a great conservation attention because it used to be lumped with the brown-headed nuthatch, a North American bird. Um, the similar story with Bahama Warbler. It used to be lumped with yellow-throated warbler, which winters in Grand Bahama. So people thought it was the same species. But in 2010, a study, or 2011 rather, a study split the bird from the yellow-throated warbler, and it became known as Bahama Warbler. So we then had Bahama Nuthatch and Bahama Warbler. The bad news for these birds is once the Bahama Nuthatch was split in 2004, it was found that it lived only on Grand Bahama. So it was entirely endemic to Grand Bahama only. Nothing was known about its previous, or whether it had a previous historical range. Uh, Whereas the warbler is restricted to Grand Bahama and Abaco, the other neighboring northern island, but otherwise it doesn't live anywhere else. So we spent 3 months surveying, doing an island-wide survey of all the birds, of all the specialist birds in Grand Bahama. We did 122 transects, surveyed 464 locations. And did we find the bird? We did find one nuthatch, and the University of Bahamas and another team found another individual. So at best, we at the end of our survey we had two birds, which was not really a viable population anymore, and we thought if more are not found, then this population is functionally extinct. Sadly for the bird as well, Hurricane Dorian hit Grand Bahama. It was a hurricane of Category 5. Category 5. Perhaps it deserved a new Category 6. It was very, very strong. The hurricane stalled on Grand Bahama for a day. It wreaked havoc. And since then, the Bahama Nuthatch has not been seen. Sadly, also, Bahama Warbler has not been seen anymore. So we now don't know what the status of many birds are, and in particular the species that we studied. Should show you typical habitats that you find in the Bahama, in Grand Bahama, which is pine forest. And if I show you these are called thatch palms, these big palms, and mostly the forest is comprised of Caribbean pine, which is native to many of the islands. Very tall tree, very thin, but it is also a fire-loving species. It has a fire regime of it needs to be burned between every 1 to 10 years. And often you'll find forests like this, where most of it is burned, except thatch palms still survive, and Caribbean pine still survives. Because, well, I guess they are adapted to fires, and so, but fire also clears a lot of the dominant ground vegetation and exposes the limestone substrate, which is very difficult to walk on. Typical birds that you find, Bahama Warbler, it seems to be specialized, it's not just a pine forest bird, but it seems to be specialized on forests that have been recently burned. It does seem to like, forests that are burned. And then we also found black-throated blue warbler, which winters in Grand Bahama, and others we found pygmy warbler. This is a female I photographed, and this was the male I photographed. Otherwise, fairly abundant. Others to note, palm warbler. Palm warbler was the first bird that appeared on eBird after, or that was sighted and was recorded on eBird after Hurricane Dorian hit Grand Bahama. And this was only a month after the hurricane hit. Then we have, we did find many Bahama yellowthroat. It seems to be very abundant. This is a male with the black mask. It's a bird that when you see it makes you happy every time you see it, because it's very, not only it's very pretty, but it's very active, very curious, can be very territorial as well. And this was the bird, I could not believe my eyes when I saw it. I saw it on the nature reserve where we stayed, Brand Nature Center, indigo bunting. I could not believe my eyes because it was so blue, and I had never seen a bird that blue. And I couldn't wait to get a picture and show everyone. And it turns out that the bird hadn't been seen in the Brand Nature Center for 2 years, because sometimes in some years it is very common. It winters there in Grand Bahama. In other years, it's not very common at all. You may not see many. So yes, I guess we were like, although I only saw 2 individuals. Black and white warbler, I saw only about 5 individuals, didn't see that many, and hence I only have this not very great photo, but I should say that because many of these birds winter in the Bahamas from October to April, and we arrived on the island on the 9th of April, so we didn't have much time with the winter visitors, and literally had to birdwatch every day, not only to practice for our project, but also to be able to identify the birds, because if we couldn't, then we couldn't do the project. And olive-capped warbler, again, another very abundant warbler. I do remember at the start, I confused olive-capped with Bahama warbler, and even with yellow-throated warbler, quite similar. But yeah, otherwise, it's a permanent resident of Grand Bahama, and abaco does wander outside. You can find them in Cuba. Northern parula, again, another warbler that winters in Grand Bahama. But then it goes back to North America, so it was only there during April. Northern mockingjay, one of my favorites because it has a great repertoire of songs, and I always noticed that it was the first bird to sing when we would wake up in early morning about 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. Sometimes to go and do surveys. It was always the first bird to sing. Yeah, it is an incredible bird. Grey catbird is quite a funny one because it does sound like a cat meowing. So the first time I heard it, I did think it was a cat, but then I saw it and I photographed this bird. But yeah, another one that winters in Grand Bahama, but otherwise breeds in the US. Blue-gray gnatcatcher as well. Another one very territorial. Black-faced grassquit. This is the female, and that's the male. Another fairly common one. Lasagra flycatcher, really good flycatcher. And the subspecies of Lasagras is endemic to many Bahamian islands. This is Western spindalis. It used to be called striped-headed tanager, but as sometime after we arrived on the island, it was split from tanagers and became a spindalis, a Western spindalis. But otherwise, another very common bird, very, very pretty, colorful, the males. Common yellow throat, you will only see it in the winter, so from October to April. Otherwise, it goes. I believe it breeds in parts of Central America and the US. So I was still lucky to find this individual. Cuban peewee. This was the best photo I could get. Didn't find it easy to find them, but it does have a subspecies. The subspecies of the Cuban peewee is resident in Grand Bahama. One of the nightjars, Antillean nighthawk, which is very difficult to see sometimes. I only stumbled across this individual. I had been trying to find them for quite a while, for over a month, and I stumbled across this individual. The other species of nightjar that you find is the Chuckwill's widow. Other habitats, you have the Australian pine dominated habitats. So Australian pines are found mostly on coastal areas. They may act as hurricane shields, although some people don't like them because they have been introduced and are invasive, but I didn't find myself any evidence that they were mixed with the native Caribbean pine. Caribbean pine seems to be more inland pine, whereas Australian pine more coastal, or you do find in areas like this called mixed plantation. And then other birds that you may find on coastal areas, royal tern and laughing gulls, and frigate birds, which is absolutely amazing. I do remember my colleague Matthew was ecstatic when he saw frigate birds. We didn't see that many, but you know, we did see a few. And other habitats, you have mangrove, mostly on the northern areas or the eastern of the island. Otherwise, in the south, you don't. And in these habitats, you have red-winged blackbird. This is the female, and the male, fairly common, pretty much guaranteed to see one if you go to mangroves, and they call as well, quite loud. Otherwise, Great Antillean bullfinch. This is the immature male, and this is the adult. We didn't find many of these when we found them, mostly centered on the on the east of the island. And now I'll just explain a bit more about Grand Bahama. So you have West End and Freeport. West End was the first official town in Grand Bahama, and it is the actual capital. Although people do think that the capital is Freeport, but West End is the actual capital. Freeport is a very important city where also quite a lot of people live, and where you have some markets and so on, and can do shopping, etc. And then we have Lucayan states, large areas of forests here, and then East End area, large areas of forests scattered, and here on the northern areas you have a lot of mangrove. Sometimes you do have a bit of mangrove here, but mostly on the northern areas and on the east. And then you have some of these keys, August Key, which we went to. We didn't go to any of these other keys, so there could be some hope for some of the birds that disappeared after Hurricane Dorian, perhaps clinging onto some of these keys. We don't know. And then you have national parks. This is Run Nature Center. This is Peterson Keys National Park. It's on an island that is very important for bridal terns. And then you have Lucayan National Park, which has either mangrove or caves. So on to West End. So on West End, you have, as I said, it is the capital. It is a resort town now. You can actually go and visit. You can go and visit and wander around. There are many bars, shops, and really, really grand houses. I would say grand houses, very pretty houses. But you also, this is the best photo I have of cattle egret. But you also have killdeer, fairly common in West End. And then as we descend from West End to this area west of Freeport and Holmes Rock, this is what we tend to see, a lot of destruction from hurricane. I'm not really sure which hurricane this was. Grand Bahama had been recently hit, say in 2004 by Hurricane Francis, 2004 again Hurricane Jean, 2005 Hurricane Wilma, and then recently before Hurricane Dorian, Hurricane Matthew. So this is what we tended to see. And then forests which were not in great condition, severely affected by hurricane force winds, because hurricanes also have brought storm surges, which then the forest gets inundated with salt water, and many of the plants die, and many of the trees die. And then we have Freeport. In Freeport, we stayed at Run Nature Center. It is an 100-acre pine forest area. You have many trails. You can wander around, and then you can get to this large area. It has a few terrapins, a few herons, night herons, tricolor herons. But yeah, otherwise, we stayed in a bungalow, more or less here. This is other birds that you can find. Red-legged thrush, very common, pretty much like a blackbird. White-crowned pigeon, smooth-billed dunny of the cuckoo family. Again, fairly common, but really, really pretty. I had never seen a bird like that. Very, very chunky. And then you also find turkey vultures across the island. I've always wondered, what do turkey vultures eat? Because there doesn't seem to be much on the island to eat, but I'm not really sure. And then you have American kestrel, but the subspecies of the American kestrel is called Bahamas kestrel, and it's resident in some islands of the Bahamas. You have a woodpecker, now the only woodpecker left, the hairy woodpecker. Grand Bahama used to have the West Indies woodpecker, but it's now extinct on the island, so there's only one left. Who knows what the effect is on the birds in terms of availability of nest sites. And then we have American redstart, and another one that winters in Grand Bahama. This the female, and this is the best glimpse I could get of the male. And lovely Cuban emerald, the female on the left, male on the right. This was it is again another bird that makes you happy every time you see it, and you know when it's going to appear because it calls before it turns up. But other birds, ground dove, again another fairly common. And then in Freeport you have a Port Lucayan marketplace, and rake and scrape. And so we did go out sometimes for these for these parties of rake and scrape. And yes, I remember this. This is an abandoned hotel. So what happened is, because hurricanes affected Grand Bahama so much, some hotels were built but then never received residents, or they were left abandoned. People never came back, and so we tried to go there to see if we could find any bats. Because Grand Bahama doesn't have that many mammals, but it has some bats, such as the red bat. But we were advised not to go to the abandoned hotel because of safety reasons. And then we have also many villages in Freeport. It really feels tropical. It makes you feel jealous of the people that live in these areas. Really tropical, great vista. But sadly, in Freeport, this is what the forest looks like, heavily littered. I guess I should say that it does seem that it is difficult to recycle on the island. It's a small island, and it does seem to be difficult to recycle. And we did come across many forest stands that were heavily littered with bottles and worse, but I'll show you. Then we have Garden of the Groves, a botanical garden, which is very good for bird watching. We went bird watching there on what's it called, big birding day or something. That happens in May. And we found scarlet tanager, not a tanager anymore. Now it's in the cardinal family, but I could not believe my eyes when I saw this bird. And I tried. It never. The bird just didn't stop still. So I tried to get many photos, and this is the best I could get. But yeah, it was really a lifer for me. And then we have Lucayan States. This is where most of the forest really starts in Lucayan States and extends all the way across to East End. And you have one of the national parks, Lucayan National Park, which has either mangroves or caves such as this, where you can find fish and a few bats, such as the red bat. And a large network of old logging tracks, because Grand Bahama was heavily logged from the 50s to 70s to provide timber and to many countries. And this is why it was left with a network of logging tracks, which we used to navigate to access some of our point count areas. But otherwise, you also have blue holes you can dive into, you can swim, and it's really fun to do. And then some of the forests, it's really a mix. You'd find some forests in fairly good condition, quite sparse trees, but lots of patch palms, but also heavily burned. Perhaps it didn't help that there had been a large fire in some of the Lucayan States area 2 months before we arrived. But once again, you can see that when the forest is heavily burned, what survives is the Caribbean pine and a few patch palms. They do seem to be able to recover faster than any other plants. On this photo, this shows, well, something I had never seen, but this tree was struck by lightning and then it became split in two. I had never seen that before. And then we have finally East End. This is where East End starts. Just look how amazing the color of the water is. And we find the first thing we find is this missile base, which is full of books, old books, and you can just go inside, have a look, and take whatever takes your fancy. I took a few National Geographic magazines, and then you can stop and go for a beer at Bishop's Cafe. And if you wander around, you do see evidence of destruction from hurricane, probably Hurricane Wilma or Francis in 2004, as well as Matthew. But otherwise, forests in East End seem to be the ones that were in best condition out of the ones in West End, which were really not in good condition. And then, as you've seen, the ones in Freeport, heavily littered. But in East End, didn't have that many old logging tracks because the vegetation was already recovering and covering the logging tracks. So it wasn't easy to navigate on the island through some of these areas. But if you then persist and you get to the north of the island, you see these areas of mangrove. This just to represent, and unfortunately, you also see some bad treatment of these forests. This is not an uncommon sight. This is just to show this was a causeway that was giving in, and so we had to access some of the point counts. Further up, we had to actually stop our vehicle here and continue on foot sometimes. And August key, that's one of the first key that you find on East End. But we also find evidence of a crash, a plane crash, but also banana quills. This was really great to see because it is not that common of a bird. It is a bit rare in Grand Bahama, but yeah, we did manage to see one, luckily, but we had to go really far on foot to see one. And then we ended up surveying some areas there because, we hadn't seen the nuthatch and we thought it could be there. So more wildlife. We have a ghost crab. I don't really know what this is. Some sort of forest crab. It was on the forest. I was astonished to see a crab on the forest, really far away from any water body, water source. And then you also have invasives. Let's say American raccoons, which were introduced sometime in the 1800s. Not quite sure when. But their population does expand because tourists feed them, and so who knows what impact they have on the birds. Then you also have, I photographed this green anole. This is endemic to the Bahamas, and lemon shark. You also have tiger sharks. What other sharks? Tiger sharks and lemon sharks. That's what I can remember. What threats are there? for Grand Bahama. So I've already talked about um, fires, the frequency of fires, and also hurricanes. So 2004 Francis and Jean, 2005 Wilma, Hurricane Matthew in 2016, and 2019 Hurricane Dorian, which could have been warranted a new category, but yeah, it was one of the most powerful that to have hit in Grand Bahama. Severely damaged the island. It caused a great human cost and wildlife cost. Um, in the hurricane season from June to November. Yeah, so just to demonstrate the path that Hurricane Dorian took, it hit the island that Bahama Warbler is restricted to. So both of them, Abaco and Grand Bahama. And Grand Bahama also bad news for Bahama Nuthatch and many of the birds and people. And it caused great inundation in Freeport and areas of West End, but also Lucayan states where large parts of the forest is situated. And this is just to show the difference in 2018 before Dorian and what happened to the forest in 2019 because it caused large storm surges which inundated many parts of the forest. Post-Hurricane Dorian, as I said, Bahama Warbler was seen in 1 month after the hurricane, and large parts of the forest were also burned afterwards. And well, some of the biggest problems on the forest as well, other threats is urban development, because it really reduces the areas that the forest can exist. Fly tipping, you do find washing machines, all sorts, bottles, a bus, plane, all sorts. And I think also there's threats for the birds is lack of nesting sites because West Indies woodpecker, since it went extinct, no one knows what effect that will have on the birds in terms of nesting sites. Additional pressures, you also have invasive species like the American raccoon, cats. Cats seem to have contributed to the demise of Bahama Oriole from Abaco, which is now only restricted to Andros. As corn snakes, we did find evidence of corn snake skin, and there is already evidence that they do have an effect on the birds. We also saw two rats. I'm not sure it was documented before, but no doubt they will have an effect. The brown rat. And just to finalize, the challenges that we faced can start here because Grand Bahama substrate is made of limestone. It is very difficult to walk, so you do need a walking pole or two to move. And then this is what Bahamians call doctor fly. It is an incredibly aggressive yellow fly. It does chase people. I remember snorkeling, and as soon as my skin is exposed after, if I am on the surface, as soon as my skin is exposed, start getting bitten. They're very, very aggressive, and no insect repellent seems to work against them. It's quite annoying. And this is poison wood. It's a very annoying plant. I hate this plant because its sap it does produce a sap from its trunk and leaves, and in particular when it rains, if raindrops leach from the leaves and touches your skin, it can provoke rushes. I just hate this pond. It is everywhere. It is pretty much everywhere on the island, and you have to be very careful not to touch its leaves, not to break any bark. We also got stuck many times. We got the car stuck, and sometimes there were some areas where we could not go in, but we would take the pins out and go in anyway, because well, science doesn't stop. Well, and that is the end of my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you very much indeed, David. If you perhaps you'd like to change the screen so that we can see you.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. You gave us an account of Grand Bahama, warts and all there, didn't you? Not always a tropical paradise by any means. Thank you for covering so much. I'm sure there are a number of questions that people have, and if anybody has got a question they want to direct to David, either face to face as it were, or via the chat button, please do proceed. We'd like to hear your questions.
David?
Yes.
Sorry, you can't see me. My light's gone off. Thank you very much for a really, really good talk. Really enjoyed it, and certainly given me the urge to want to go across the Atlantic and go and see some Caribbean or North American
Absolutely,
birds.
you definitely should.
Yeah, it's looking good there. But so, did you think you saw the last Bahama Nuthatch and the last Bahama Warblers then?
Can't say the last Bahama Warblers, so certainly so far the last Bahama Warblers on the island, but it still clings in southern Abaco. Whereas Bahama Nuthatch is now globally extinct. Unless someone finds it, it is globally extinct. I did know when we saw it, I knew this could be the last time we see the bird because, well, I mean, we spent 3 months and we only saw one. And then suddenly at the University of the Bahamas saw another one, but we could tell how long is this bird going to survive. And so, yeah, you do get ecstatic for seeing it, but then you do realize that it may be the last time as soon as you leave the island.
Oh dear, that's quite sad. Yeah. Are you aware of? Because I know the island of Montserrat in the Caribbean. I think that got like half the island got destroyed by a massive volcanic explosion, and I suppose that's the problem with a lot of these endemic birds on small islands. They're at the mercy of the forces of nature, like hurricanes and volcanic explosions. Montserrat oriole is, I know they breed it in Chester Zoo, and it does seem to be doing very well in captivity. Are any of these really endangered Bahama species, are they anywhere in captivity that you're aware of?
No, none of them are, because they don't receive that much conservation attention. I'm not really sure why. They only seem to get conservation attention, I suppose, once they become critically endangered. But then sometimes that is already too late. So not that I'm aware of for the warbler. The warbler is now going to have to be have to quantify how many there are left in Abaco. Nuthatch, I don't really know, to be honest. Whereas Oriole seems to be clinging on fine in Andros, so perhaps, yes, there could be in future some captive breeding and then translocating some of the birds to the islands where they were originally as well. That could be, but that will involve quite a lot of research and it will take time.
And so I noticed looking at Bahama Warbler, it looks very much like yellow-throated warbler, just the yellow goes all the way down the belly. And Bahama Nuthatch, presumably, is it brown-headed that you get in Florida?
Yes, brown-headed. Yeah.
So was Bahama Nuthatch, was that until fairly recently, was that like an endemic subspecies? Because I suppose that could be a problem when subspecies probably don't get as much international recognition as species, which is why I suppose it's they're going about people splitting things, but for conservation point of view, it's important because then people will pay more attention to it if it's a full species.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. With the nuthatch, it was as soon as it was split, then that's when people realized, oh my gosh, this bird is in danger. Whereas before, it wasn't receiving the attention that it deserved, although it was already a Bahama Nuthatch, a Sita Pusilla insularis instead of a Sita Pusilla. But yeah, like you said, because it was a subspecies, it wasn't getting the conservation attention that it deserved. And I think the exact same thing happened with the warbler. And who knows what other birds out there that are sufficiently different in the Bahamas, but at the moment they are lumped with other species, and therefore they are subspecies.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for those questions, Stephen, for your answers there, David. That was very interesting. I'd like to ask, what's the sort of level of resources that goes into the conservation of these endangered species in terms of habitat acquisition as reserves or in terms of monitoring and survey? For example, were you able to do any bird ringing to try and assess populations of these birds?
Absolutely not. I wish. I absolutely wish. I even think of myself at the very least. That's why I am also learning to ring, because who knows, one day I could get involved with some ringing there. I don't know. But mostly the birds are, I mean, American birds are heavily monitored, but the Bahamian ones are more monitored by citizen science. There are some people, so if you went on eBird, you'll always see the exact same names recording birds, but it's mostly citizen science. And so,
there's still a lot more work to be done from a scientific
absolutely.
Point.
I think it's also because Bahamians worry much more about the marine environment than the terrestrial environment. And so there have been a lot of effort from the Bahamas National Trust, which is a BirdLife International partner, in trying to educate people to give importance to the terrestrial environment.
Yes.
Certainly when I was there, many Bahamians, they were afraid to swim, but they preferred to pay attention to the marine environment, and many didn't go to the forest. I spoke to many people that just said, no, never go to the forest. Because I guess that's why I also showed you the challenges, because it's not all paradise. Absolutely, to go into those forests, it is hard work, and that could be why as well people don't go and bird watch there very much. It could be they don't know very much about the forest, they don't explore, and so yes, the Bahamas National Trust is trying to educate people more on that area.
Well, that's good to hear. Any other questions for David?
I think Simon has a question.
Please go ahead, Simon.
Hello, can you hear me okay? I've got some on the chat box.
Okay, can we just have Simon first, if you're ready, Simon?
I'm ready, but I don't mind giving precedence to the chat box if that's...
No, please go ahead, Simon.
Okay. Thank you, David. Fascinating overview of Grand Bahama. My question is, again, about the Nuthatch, of course, and the Warbler. You said that they haven't been seen since. My question is, have they have people been looking for them? And I say, look, you mentioned eBird, but we know that eBird often is bird watchers, and often bird watchers tend to go always in the same places. So do we need to book tickets and start going and look for them properly, or people have done that already? What are the efforts been? Thank you.
Okay, so a bit hard to say, because obviously after Hurricane Dorian, I did see evidence that some bird watchers were going out to find these birds. Then obviously the pandemic came, and it wasn't easy for people to even get out of the house to go and survey anything. As far as I know, was it last year? Last year in November, there was a team from a team mixed with Bahamian ornithologists and American ornithologists went to parts of Abaco, because in Abaco there's also a Cuban parrot, but they think it is, well, I mean, it is a subspecies of the Cuban parrot, but they think it is different enough that it is now the Bahama parrot. But officially it is still a Cuban parrot. And so, yeah, there have been some surveys in south of Abaco, and that's where the Bahama Warbler was seen post-Dorian. I have not found any evidence that there's a lot of bird watching going on, or even research going on in those areas, because I mean, I spoke to you before about this. It is incredibly expensive, and I don't know, it just doesn't seem like people care so much or pay so much attention to Grand Bahama. I can't really explain why that is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for your answer there, David. Do we have some questions in the chat box that we can direct to David? Gary, are you able to do that?
Yeah. Jean, do you actually want to unmute and ask them yourself or not?
No, I've written them down, so okay. My head won't reinvent them again.
Okay, so. I'll ask. Okay, so there's two questions. The first is there any indication of rising sea levels?
I've not seen any indication, but I would assume so, because that is the global trend of climate change, rising sea levels. And so there is concern that rising sea levels will constrict the forests even more, because at the moment they do get affected by the hurricanes and the storm surges. But yes, rising sea levels can affect the forests even more. But yeah, I've not seen evidence myself, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay. And secondly, Jean, I was thinking of the trash around the island. Is there any education of children in the schools on that matter?
Yes, definitely seen evidence when I spoke to some people, including some teachers, and they did say that they would be trying to educate children in order to learn more about the environment, so that they would care about it and then protect it. Because I also found, for example, from speaking to some adults, many didn't know much about the forest, many didn't know much about the birds, including Bahama Nuthatch. When we were trying to find it, many people didn't know that this bird even existed, Bahama Nuthatch, Bahama Warbler. And so, yeah, there's definitely hope that, yeah, the education in schools could turn the tide. And hopefully it's not too bad for the birds that are still there.
Okay, thank you. And Kate's asking, can you start again. Can she ask what rake and scrape is, and whether you worked with any I can't say that, Bahamians, sorry.
Yeah, so rake and scrape is the traditional music from the Bahamas. they actually use a rake to make music, and then there's other instruments involved, but there's always a rake which they scrape, and it makes music. In terms, we did work with some colleagues from Bahamas National Trust. We also wanted to take 2 students from the University of the Bahamas with us, but they didn't seem interested. And in the end, it was just myself and Matthew. And then we had, yes, some people from Bahamas National Trust for logistical purposes and all sorts, even to rescue us sometimes from sticky situations.
That's great, thank you. That's all the questions at the moment.
Thank you, Gary. I'll just final plea if there are any direct questions for David before we round up this evening's meeting.
Could I just ask one more, please, David?
Yeah, go on, Steve.
When you showed us the satellite imagery of before and after the hurricane, it was just totally devastating. Like it had been totally denuded of any vegetation.
Yeah.
What was the damage like under the sea? Did it affect the coral reefs or anything, or was that because the fact that it was under the sea, was it not as badly damaged?
That's a good question. I don't know. Not looked so much at damage under the sea. What I've looked was really the terrestrial damage. I'm trying to think whether there was any coral nearby the island. But yeah, I can't remember. I certainly remember on Abaco there were coral 100 meters offshore. So definitely they have been affected, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. Okay. Yep. Thanks, David. Thanks again. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Any other questions? Well, if there aren't any questions, may I, on behalf of you all, thank David very much for this evening's wonderful presentation. You've really unmasked both the beauty and the beast of Bahama, making it very clear to us what the wonderful natural beauties are and wildlife interests, as well as the huge threats. And I think it really strikes home when we live in a country, the British Isles, which is so benign in respect of the natural phenomena that affect us, to hear about an island which has suffered 4 great hurricanes in little over 20 years, which regularly is burnt to its knees, which has a fairly high density of population with all the inevitable development that goes on, which has been subject to introductions of this sort of animal and that sort of plant, as well as the modern horrors of litter, etc. Those are just a huge number of factors to take into account when looking at the ecology of any species, both marine and terrestrial, with wings or without. And you really brought it home to us tonight, the great number of interacting factors that go into affecting, in this case, bird populations in particular. I'm quite sure that the experience must have had quite a profound effect on you both personally and professionally. I'm sure you really engaged immediately with the challenges that it brought, and it will stand you in good stead for all the future work that you do. And I really hope that you get the chance to keep up your interest in Bahamian ecology and conservation, that you get back there to see how things are recovering and how the general conservation theme in the island might be developing. I sincerely hope so. But it's clear that the work that you and Matthew did was a real cornerstone for conservation activity, setting a benchmark for which hopefully future research can rely on and relate to, which is so important. And I'm sure that from what you've said, we're all left with this feeling that Bahama and islands like it are so dynamic, both in terms of what nature does to it and what humans do to these islands. And the wildlife will only survive if it too is really able to respond to these changes. You've shown us how some do and how some don't. Thank you for going to the trouble of reviewing so many species. That was wonderful, and giving us images that showed both male and female, and explaining both about the residential and the migratory species. You really gave us a complete picture, David, one which can only have come from somebody like you who spent a good deal of time there. So once again, for Bird Group members, it's been a real privilege to hear from somebody that really knows their topic and is prepared to present it in a really interesting and entertaining way for us this evening. Thank you very much indeed, and good luck with your current work and work indeed in the future. And do keep in touch. We'd love to hear from you wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Much appreciated.